Hello to everyone, I am Benyamin Poghosyan and this is a Viewpoint on Noyan Tapan TV. This week we will focus our attention on two big events which took place during last days. First, it was a G7 summit and then NATO summit in Madrid. So when we are discussing these two events, we may say that these two events proved once again that the West decided to enter the long-term confrontation with Russia. Because Russia and war in Ukraine, these two were the dominating topics both on G7 and also on NATO summit. Regarding the G7, the format was established even before the end of the Cold War, before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then it was transformed into G8, including also Russia, and this format was seen as a step to somehow incorporate Russia into this Western developed countries high club or elite club. However, starting from 2014, there were a lot of discussions that maybe it's time to kick out Russia from this elite club of economically developed Western democracies because Russia is becoming more and more authoritarian. However, this ended when kick out Russia after 2014, when this Crimea or Ukraine crisis started, and then events followed in Crimea. However, somehow the West thought to have or keep channels open with Russia. We all know that there were different meetings, summits during Trump administration, also when Biden came to power. There was a Russia-US summit back in June 2021 in Geneva. The European leaders, especially Angela Merkel, former Chancellor of Germany, and also the President Macron, they sought to keep the channels open with Russia. However, as Russia put forward his demands in late December 2021 about turning back or scaling back NATO's presence in Eastern Europe and coming up with the security guarantees to Russia, then relations started to deteriorate, and it all ended with the Russian decision to start the special military operation in Ukraine on February 24, 2022. After that, the West perception was really united. Russia is evil, even there were some comparisons regarding between Russians and Nazi Germany in late 1930s and early 1940s. So the West came up with unified position. United States, European Union, NATO, and also some Asian allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, that Russia is evil and the Russian state should be countered, and as a longer term it should be transformed. Of course, it's very difficult to elaborate what under the term of Russia's transformation West means, but definitely we may say that there is a perception in the West that as far as Russia is not a liberal state, or at least is not in the process of becoming a liberal state, resembling the state systems which we see in Europe or in Euro-Atlantic community, Russia always will be source of threat. So everything should be done not only to prevent Russian territorial acquisitions in Ukraine, but also to make sure that first, Russia will not be able militarily to launch large-scale conventional operations, akin to operation which Russia is now undertaking in Ukraine, but the longer term there is a clear perception that the Russian state should be transformed into liberal state, otherwise Russia always will be source of irritation and source of threats. And in late March 2022, when President Biden was in Poland, this was culminated by his famous speech when he said that President Putin cannot be in power in Russia. Of course, immediately the White House and the Secretary of State made a statement that no, this is not regime change, policy of regime change in Russia. But we all see these accusations of regime change and also denials that there are no regime change, also regarding the West or United States policy towards Iran. When President Trump put forward his maximum economic pressure campaign on Iran, also there were statements that so United States does not want to have the regime change, but it was obvious that the ultimate goal of the United States was a regime change. So, as this meeting of 7 economically developed and democratic states, the summit, the key reason or the key goal of the summit was to send a clear message to the world that the democracies or the collective West is united against Russia, and it will continue to support Ukraine as long as it's needed. Then we had the NATO summit, June 29, June 30. NATO adopted its new strategic concept, which will guide NATO's activities for another 10 years, at least 10 years. And for the first time, Russia was declared as an imminent and most significant threat for the NATO. Then, of course, for the first time in NATO, also China was declared as being a threat or challenge to NATO. Also, several other decisions were made during the summit. For example, to increase the number of high readiness NATO troops up to 300,000, and other decisions also to increase military posture of NATO. The second significant issue discussed at the NATO summit was the official invitation which were sent to Finland and Sweden to join the alliance. Of course, there was a lot of discussions and noise about Turkey's possible veto, but every serious expert, starting from the very day when Finland and Sweden made statements that they would like to become a NATO member, it was obvious that at the end of the day, Turkey will not veto this process. Of course, some argued that Turkey may resist more, but as politicians or practitioners are telling, that Turkey is a difficult client for the United States and for the West. Especially Erdogan Turkey is a difficult and tough client. But still Turkey is client, and Turkey knows very well what the limits of client are, what the framework is in which client can operate. It can become more difficult, less difficult, but there is a clear framework after which state is not becoming a client, it's becoming a rival or even enemy. And Turkey understood very well that if it will continue to veto Finland and Sweden membership, it will break the rule of clients. So yes, Turkey is a difficult client, Turkey is a tough client, especially under Erdogan, but Turkey is a still client. And this trilateral memorandum signed between Turkey, Finland and Sweden was a clear sign that Turkey understands the limits of its limits to bargain with the West. However, on strategic level, we clearly see that the West is united in its decision to punish Russia, to weaken Russia, and in the long-term perspective to transform Russia. However, another interesting thing was, and we discussed this also during our previous episode, that in parallel or a few days before these summits of Western economically developed and liberal democratic countries, there were the summits of BRICS and BRICS Plus. So we can see that yes, West is unified to punish Russia, but we are not able to speak about new Cold War or about new bipolarity. Because if in original Cold War we have a situation when the world was divided into two big camps, United States and Soviet Union, and others were trying to push forward this non-aligned movement, but in general almost everyone was somehow involved into these two camps. Now the situation is not the same. Yes, we have Russia, we have the collective West, which is unified against Russia, but also we have other significant players. It's China, it's Iran, it's Brazil, even it's South Africa. And interestingly now, for example, several states like Argentina made or expressed the interest to become part of BRICS. So there is also, we are in the very early period of process of enlargement of BRICS, which theoretically could be transformed from 5 countries into the union of 6, 7 or 8 countries. It's interesting, even some Russian experts are now speaking to create another G8, or G7. It will be not economically developed and liberal democracies, it could be BRICS countries plus Argentina plus some others. And in that case, we may have another bipolarity, like collective West against everyone else. But most probably, the world will enter into not another bipolarity, let it be US vs China, or collective West with Russia and China, but world most probably will enter into the phase of multipolar and more dangerous and more insecure and more unstable world, when we will see a lot of competition also on a regional level to reach some advancements. And summing up, we may say that at least As for now, more than 4 months after the launch of war in Ukraine, Collective West is united, and Collective West is ready to continue to support Ukraine, as they say, as long as possible. And even Western politicians, including, for example, the Prime Minister of Belgium, made a clear statement that these conflicts should be ended through war, not through peace negotiations, but conflicts should be ended by military means, and conflict will be ended when Russia will be militarily completely defeated. Obviously, these statements mean that, unfortunately for Ukraine, because at the end of the day it's not the Belgium which is being destroyed, and of course for Prime Minister of Belgium it's very easy to sit in Brussels and say that okay, war should may continue for another 2 or 3 years, we are ready to send weapons and money Ukrainians to be killed or kill Russians, because everybody understands that no one is going to militarily attack Belgian territory. But again, unfortunately for Ukraine, this shows that the war or the conflict will continue for quite long. Maybe we will have some break in active military phase, but then most probably second or third phases of active military activities may start. Simultaneously, why Russia-West rivalry or Russia-West proxy war in Ukraine will continue, and this war also has other dimensions like economic warfare, information warfare, cybersecurity warfare. Simultaneously, we will see the process of evolving and emergence of other actors which do not want to be neither part of Russia or to be fully sided in Russia, but also they don't want to be sided totally also with the West, and thus the start of the war in Ukraine, or as Russia called it, the special military operation, most probably will perceive later as the final starting point for the emergence of multipolar and more unstable world and the beginning of end of the unipolar world, which emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union and which was characterized by the absolute hegemony of the United States. This is all for today. Thank you, and we will meet soon.